Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last two chapters of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. What an exciting book this has been. I wonder if you remember how the children and King Caspian had met those three bushy, shrub-like looking things at the end of the long table, Aslan's table, on that long last island. And do you remember who they were and what they were doing there? That's right. They were the three last lords of Narnia that Caspian had come to find, and they were sound asleep. And their spell of sleep could not be broken unless someone from the Voyage of the Dawn Treader went to the very utter east and never came back. And then when the others came back, the spell would be broken and the three lords would be wide awake again. Actually, there were four lords, weren't there, who were now asleep at the table. For mercifully, they brought Roop off the ship and put him at the table and let him fall into sleep that was restful, no daydreams, no nightmares, no nothing that would disturb his sleep. What a blessing that was for him. And so now, the last scene that we had there was the beautiful daughter of Ramadou, the retired star, remember, said, well, in this story, you can't kiss the princess until you return from and break the enchantment, unlike other stories that we've read where the princess was wakened from a deep sleep by a kiss from the prince and then the spell was broken. No, she says, that's not the way it works in this country. You've got to break the spell first, then you can kiss the princess. And Caspian said, when we come back, I would like to speak to you, ma'am. And she smiled. And we hope that good things are going to come of that, but we'll find out, won't we? All right, this one is called The Wonders of the Last Sea, Chapter 15. Very soon after they had left Ramadou's country, they began to feel that they had already sailed beyond the world. All was different. For one thing, they all found that they were needing much less sleep. One didn't want to go to bed, nor eat much, nor even to talk, except in low voices. Another thing was the light. There was too much of it. The sun, when it came up each morning, looked twice, if not three times its usual size. And every morning, which gave Lucy the strangest feeling, the huge white birds, singing their song with human voices, streamed overhead and vanished behind them on their way to breakfast at Aslan's table. A little later, they all came flying back and vanished into the east. How beautifully clear the water is, said Lucy to herself, as she leaned over the port side early in the afternoon of the second day. And it was. The first thing that she noticed was a little black object, about the size of a shoe, traveling along at the same speed as the ship. For a moment, she thought it was something floating on the surface. But then there came floating past a bit of stale bread, which the cook had flown overboard, and the bit of bread looked as if it were going to collide with the black thing, but it didn't. It passed above it, and Lucy now saw that the black thing could not be on the surface. Then the black thing very suddenly got much bigger and flicked back to normal size a minute later. And Lucy knew she had seen something like this before somewhere else, if only she could remember where and when. She held her hand to her head and screwed up her face and put her tongue out in an effort to remember. And at last she did. Of course, it was like what you saw from a train on a bright sunny day. You saw the black shadow of your own coach running along the fields at the same speed as the train. And then when you went into a cutting, a place where the track was down below and there was grass on either side, the same shadow flicked up close to you and got huge, racing along the grass of the cutting bank. And then when you came out of the cutting, flick, once more, the black shadow had gone back to its normal size and was running along the fields. It's our shadow. It's the shadow of the Dawn Treader, said Lucy. Our shadow running along the bottom of the sea. And that time when it got bigger, it was running over a hill. But in that case, the water must be clearer than I thought. I must be seeing the bottom of sea fathoms and fathoms down. And as soon as she had said this, she realized that the great silvery expanse which she had been seeing without noticing for some time was really sand on the seabed, and that all sorts of darker or brighter patches were not lights and shadows on the surface, but real things on the bottom. At present, for instance, they were passing over a mass of soft purply green with a broad winding strip of pale gray down the middle of it. But now that she saw that it was the bottom, she could see it much better, and she could see that the bits of the dark stuff were much higher than other parts and were waving gently. Just like trees in the wind, thought Lucy, and I do believe that's what they are. It's a submarine forest. They passed on above it, and presently the pale streak was joined by another pale streak. If I were down there, thought Lucy, that streak would just be like a road through the woods, and that place where the other one joins would be a crossroads. Oh, I do wish it was. Hello, the forest is coming to an end, and I do believe that streak really was a road. I can still see it going on and on across the open sand. It's a different color, and it's all marked out with something at the edges. Seems to be like dotted lines and stones. Now it's getting wider. But it was not really getting wider, it was just getting nearer. She realized this because of the way in which the shadow of the ship came rushing up toward her, and the road, she felt sure it was a road now, had zigzags, and obviously it was climbing up a steep hill. And when she held her head sideways and looked back, what she saw was very much like what you see when you look down a winding road from the top of a hill. She could even see shafts of sunlight falling through the deep water onto that wooded valley, and in the extreme distance, everything melting away into a dim greenness. But in some places, the sunny ones, the water was ultramarine blue. She could not, however, spend much time looking back. What was coming into view in the forward direction was much too exciting. The road had apparently now reached the top of the hill, and it ran straight forward. Little specks were moving to and fro on it. And now something wonderful, fortunately in full sunlight, or as full as can be when it's falling through fathoms of water, flashed into sight. It was knobbly and jagged and of a pearly or perhaps ivory color. She was so nearly straight above it that she could hardly make out what it was, but everything became plain when she noticed its shadows. The sunlight was falling across Lucy's shoulders, so the shadow of the thing lay stretched out on the sand behind it. And by its shape, she saw clearly that it was a shadow of towers and pinnacles, minarets and domes. Why, it's a huge city and a huge castle, said Lucy to herself. But I wonder why they built it on top of a high mountain. Long afterwards, when she was back in England and talked about all these adventures with Edmund, they thought of a reason, and I'm pretty sure it's the real one. In the sea, the deeper you go, the darker and colder it gets. And it's down there in the dark and cold that dangerous things live. The sea serpents and such like. The sea people feel about their valleys as we do about mountains, and they feel about their mountains the way we do about valleys. It's on the heights, or as they would say in the shallows, that there is warmth and peace. The reckless hunters and brave knights of the sea go down to the depths for quest and adventures, but they return home to the heights for rest and peace, courtesy and counsel, sports, dances, and songs. They had passed the city, and the seabed was still rising. It was only a few 100 feet below the ship now. The road had disappeared. They were sailing over an open, park-like country, dotted with little groves of brightly colored vegetation. And then, Lucy nearly squealed aloud with excitement, she saw people. There were between 15 and 20 of them, all mounted on seahorses. Not the tiny little seahorses which you see in aquariums, but horses much bigger than the people were themselves. They must be a very noble and lordly people, Lucy thought to herself, for she could catch the gleam of gold on some of their foreheads and streamers of emerald or orange-colored stuff fluttering from their shoulders in the current. And then, "Oh, bother these fish," said Lucy, for a whole shoal of small, fat fish swimming quite close to the surface had come between her and the sea people. But though this did spoil her view, it led to the most interesting things of all. Suddenly, A fierce little fish of a kind she had never seen before came darting up from below, snapped, grabbed, and sank rapidly with one of the fat fish in its mouth. And all the sea people were sitting on their horses, staring up at what had happened. These seemed to be talking and laughing. And before the hunting fish had gotten back to them with its prey, another of the same kind came up from the sea people. And Lucy was almost certain that one big seaman, who sat on his seahorse in the middle of the party, had sent it or released it as if he had been holding it back until then in his hand or on his wrist. "Why, I do declare," said Lucy, "it's a hunting party or a hawking party or a falcon party like we would have at home. Yes, that's it. They ride out with these fierce little fish on their wrists, just like we used to ride out with falcons on our wrists when we were queens and kings of Narnia. And then they fly them, or I guess we should say they swim them, at the others." How she stopped suddenly because the scene was changing. The sea people had now noticed the Dawn Treader. The shoal of fish had scattered away in every direction. The people themselves were coming up to find out the meaning of this big black thing that had come between them and the sun. And they were now so close to the surface that if it had been in the air instead of water, Lucy could have spoken easily to them. There were men and women both. All wore crowns of some kind, and many had chains of pearls. They wore no other clothes. Their bodies were the color of cold, old ivory, their hair dark purple. The king in the center, and nobody could mistake him for anything but a king, looked proudly and fiercely into Lucy's face and shook a spear in his hand, and his knights did the same. The faces of the ladies were filled with astonishment. Lucy felt sure that they had never seen a ship or a human before. How could they? Beyond the worlds, in seas beyond the world's end, where no ships ever came. "What are you staring at, Lou?" said a voice beside her. Lucy had been so absorbed in what she was seeing that she started at the sound. And when she turned, that she found that her arm had gotten numb from leaning so long on the rail in one position. Drinian and Edmund were now beside her. "Look," she said. They both looked, but almost at once Drinian said in a low voice, "Turn around at once, your majesties. That's right. Turn around with our backs to the sea, and don't look as if we're talking about anything important." "Why, what's the matter?" said Lucy, as she obeyed. "It'll never do for the sailors to see all that," said Drinian. "We'll have men falling in love with the sea women, or falling in love with the undersea country itself and jumping overboard. I've heard things like this happen in strange seas. It's always unlucky to see these people." "But we used to know them," said Lucy. "In the old days of Caraparavel, when my brother Peter was High King, they came to the surface and sang at our coronation." "I think it must have been a different kind, Lou," said Edmund. "They could live in the air as well as underwater, but I don't think these kind can. By the look of them, they'd have surfaced and started attacking us long ago if they could. They seem very fierce." "At any rate," began Drinian, but at that moment 2 sounds were heard. One was a plop. The other was a voice from the fighting top shouting, "Man overboard!" Then everybody was busy. Some of the sailors hurried aloft to take down the sail. Others hurried below to get to the oars. And Rince, who was on duty on the poop deck, began to turn the ship around to come back to the man who had gone overboard. But by now, everybody knew that it wasn't a man. It was Reepicheep. "Drat that mouse," said Drinian. "He is more trouble than the rest of this ship's company put together. If there's ever any scrape to get into, he will get into it. We ought to put him in irons. We ought to have his whiskers cut off. Can anybody see him?" Well, this didn't mean that Drinian really disliked Reepicheep. On the contrary, he liked him very much and was therefore frightened about him, and being frightened put him into a bad temper. Just as your mother is much angrier with you for running out into the road in front of a car than a stranger would be. No one, of course, was afraid of Reepicheep drowning, for he was an excellent swimmer. But the 3 who knew what was going on below the water was afraid of those long, cruel spears in the hands of the sea people. In a few minutes, the Dawn Treader had come around, and everyone could see the black blob in the water That was Reepicheep. He was chattering with the greatest excitement, but as his mouth kept getting full of water, nobody could understand what he was saying. "He'll blurt the whole thing out if we don't stop him," said Drinian. And to prevent this, he rushed to the side and lowered a rope himself, shouting to the sailors, all right, back to your places. I hope I can heave a mouse up without help." And as Reepicheep began climbing up the rope, not very nimbly because the wet fur made him heavy, Drinian leaned over and whispered to him, "Don't tell, not a word." But when the dripping mouse had reached the deck, it turned out to be not at all interested in the sea people. "Sweet," he chirped, "sweet, sweet." "What are you talking about?" said Drinian. "And you needn't shake yourself all over me either." "I tell you, the water is sweet," said the mouse. "It's sweet, it's fresh, it's not salty." For a moment, no one took in the importance of this. But when Reepicheep once more repeated the old prophecy, "Where the waves grow sweet, doubt not, Reepicheep, there is an utter east," then, at last, everyone understood. "Let me have a bucket, Rhine Elf," said Drinian. It was handed to him, and he lowered it down, and up it came, and the water in it shone like glass. "Perhaps your majesty would like to taste it first," said Drinian to Caspian. The king took the bucket in his hands, raised it to his lips, sipped, and then drank deeply and raised his head. His face was changed. Not only were his eyes, but everything else about him had turned much brighter. "Yes," he said, "it is sweet. This is real water. I'm not sure it isn't going to kill me, but if it does, this is the death I would have chosen if I'd known about it until now." "What do you mean?" said Edmund. "It's like light more than anything else," said Caspian. "That's what it is," said Reepicheep. "Drinkable light. We must be very near the end of the world now." There was a moment's silence, and then Lucy knelt down on the deck and drank from the bucket. "It's the loveliest thing I ever tasted," she said with a kind of gasp, "but it's strong. I don't think we'll ever need to eat anything now." And one by one, everyone on board drank, and for a long time they were all silent. They felt almost too well and too strong to bear it. And presently they began to notice another result. As I have said, there had been too much light ever since they left the island of Ramadou. The sun was too large, though not too hot. The sea too bright, the air too shining. Now the light grew no less. If anything, they increased, but they could bear it. They could look straight up at the sun without blinking. They could see more light than they had ever seen before. And the deck, and the sail, and their own bodies, and their own faces became brighter and brighter, and every rope shone. And next morning, when the sun rose, 5 or 6 times its old size, they stared hard into it and could see the very feathers of the birds that came flying from it. Hardly a word was spoken on board all that day, till about dinner time. Nobody wanted any dinner. The water was enough for them. Drinian said, "I can't understand this. There's not a breath of wind. The sail is hanging as if it were dead. The sea is as flat as a pond. And yet we are sailing as fast as if there was a gale behind us." "I've been thinking that too," said Caspian. "We must be caught in some very strong current." Said Edmund. "That's not so nice if the world really has an edge and we're getting to it." "You mean," said Caspian, "that we might be, well, just poured over the edge of it?" "Yes, yes," cried Reepicheep, clapping his paws together. "That's how I've always imagined it. The world is like a great round table, and the waters of all the oceans are endlessly pouring over the edge. The ship will tip up, stand on her head for one moment, and we will see over the edge, and then down, down, the rush, the speed. And what do you think will be waiting for us at the bottom, eh?" said Drinian. "Aslan's country, perhaps," said the mouse, his eyes shining. "Or perhaps there isn't any bottom. Perhaps it goes down forever and ever. But whatever, it won't be worth anything just to have looked at it for one moment beyond the edge of the world." "But look here," said Eustace, "this is all rot. The world is round. I mean, round like a ball, not like a table. Our world is, said Edmund, but is this? Do you mean to say, said Caspian, that you three come from a world that's round like a ball and you've never told me? That really is too bad of you. Because we have fairy tales in which there are round worlds, and I've always loved them, but I never believed there were any real ones. I've always wished there were, and I've always wanted to live in one. Oh, I'd give anything if I could. I wonder if you can get into our world, why you can get into our world and we can never get into yours. If only I had the chance. It must be exciting to live on something like a ball. Have you ever been to the parts of the world where people walk upside down? Eustace shook his head. It isn't anything like that, he said. There's nothing particularly exciting about a round world when you're there. And that is the end of chapter 15. Now, I've got to just take a second here and turn on my iPad because I have a picture that I want to show you, and I had it on, but my iPad closed itself down. There we are. Let's see if I can keep it alive until the time comes to show it to you. All right. I may have to take another little break because the thing does kind of want to shut itself off every few minutes. All right. This is the last chapter, and it's called The Very End of the World. Reepicheep was the only person on board, beside Drinian and the two Pevensies, who had noticed the sea people. He had dived in at once when he saw the sea king shaking his spear. He regarded that sort of threat or challenge and wanted to have matters out there and then. But the excitement at discovering that the water was now fresh had distracted his attention. And before he remembered the sea people again, Lucy and Drinian had taken him aside and warned him not to mention what he had seen. As it turned out, they need not have bothered, because for this time the Dawn Treader was gliding over a part of the sea which seemed to be uninhabited. No one except Lucy saw anything more of the people, and even she only had one short glimpse. All morning, the following day, they sailed in fairly shallow water, and the bottom was weedy. And just before midday, Lucy saw a large shoal of fishes grazing on the weed. They were all steadily eating and all moving in the same direction. Just like a flock of sheep, thought Lucy. Suddenly, she saw a little sea girl about her own age in the middle of them, a quiet, lonely-looking girl with a sort of crook in her hand. Lucy felt sure that she must be a shepherdess or perhaps a fisherdess, and that the shoal was really a flock, and this was their pasture. Both the fishes and the girl were quite close to the surface, and just as the girl, gliding in the shallow water, and Lucy, leaning over the edge of the ship, came opposite to one another, the girl looked up and stared right into Lucy's face. Neither of them could speak to one another, and in a moment the sea girl had dropped astern, but Lucy never forgot the look on her face. It didn't look frightened or angry like those other sea people. Lucy liked that girl, and she felt certain that the girl liked her. And in that one moment they had somehow become friends. And there didn't seem to be a chance of them ever meeting again in this world or any other, but if they ever did, they would rush together with their arms held out. And after that, for many days, without wind or foam at her bows, across a waveless sea, the Dawn Treader glided smoothly east. Every day and every hour, it's gone to sleep again, but I'll wake it up again. Every day and every hour, the light became more brilliant, and still they could bear it. No one ate or slept, and no one wanted to, but they drew buckets of the dazzling water from the sea, stronger than wine and somehow wetter, more liquid than ordinary water, and they drank to one another silently in deep draughts of it. And one or two of the sailors, who had been old men when the voyage began, now grew younger every day. Everyone on board was filled with joy and excitement, but not an excitement that made one talk. The further they sailed, the less they spoke, and then almost in a whisper. The stillness of that last sea had a hold on them. "My lord," said Caspian to Drinian one day, "what do you see ahead?" "Sire," said Drinian, "I see whiteness all along the horizon, from north to south, as far as my eye can reach." "That's what I see too," said Caspian, "and I can't imagine what it is." If we were in higher latitudes, Your Majesty, said Drinian, I would say it's ice. But it can't be that, not here. All the same, we better get the men to the oars and hold the ship back against the current. Whatever this stuff is, we don't want to crash into it at this speed. They did as Drinian said, and so they continued to go slower and slower. The whiteness did not get any less mysterious as they approached it. If it was land, it was a very strange land, for it seemed just as smooth as the water and on the same level as the water. And when they got very close to it, and Drinian turned the ship hard over and the Dawn Treader was now sailing south so that she was sideways to the current, they rowed a little way southward along the edge of the whiteness, and in doing so, they made a very important discovery. The current was only about 40 feet wide, and the rest of the sea was as still as a pond. This was good news for the crew who had already begun to think that the return journey to Ramadu's land rowing against that current would be pretty poor sport. It also explained why the shepherd girl had dropped so quickly astern. She was not in the current. And still, nobody could make out what that white stuff was. Then the boat was lowered and it put off to investigate. Those who remained on the Dawn Treader could see that the boat pushed right in amongst the whiteness, and they could hear the voices of the party, clear across the still water, talking in a shrill and surprised way. There was a pause while Rhine-Elf, in the bows of the boat, took a sounding, and when, after that, the boat came rowing back, there seemed to be plenty of white stuff inside her. Everyone crowded to the side to hear the news. "Lilies, Your Majesty," shouted Rhine-Elf, standing up in the bows. "What did you say?" said Caspian. "Blooming lilies, Your Majesty," said Rhine-Elf, "same as in a pool or in a garden at home, water lilies." "Look," said Lucy, who was in the stern of the boat. She held up her wet arms full of white petals and broad green leaves. "What is the depth there, Rhine-Elf?" said Drinian. "Well, that's the funny thing, Captain. It's still deep. There's a half a fathom, 3.5 fathoms clear." "Well, they can't be real lilies then, not what we call lilies," said Eustace. Well, probably they were not, but they were very like them. And when, after some consultation, the Dawn Treader turned back into the current and began to glide eastward through Lily Lake, or the Silver Sea as they called it, but the Silver Sea stuck, and now that's on Caspian's map, the strangest part of their travels now began. Very soon, the open sea which they were leaving was only a thin rim of blue on the western horizon. Whiteness, shot with the faintest color of gold, spread around them on every side. Where their passage had pushed, except for a little blue behind them, where their passage had thrust the lilies apart and left an open lane of water that shone like dark green glass. To look at, this last sea was very much like the Arctic Ocean. And if their eyes had not by now grown as strong as eagles, the sun on all that whiteness, especially early in the morning when the sun was the hugest, would have been unbearable. And every evening, the same whiteness made the daylight last longer. There seemed to be no end to the lilies. Day after day, for all those miles and leagues of flowers, there arose a smell which Lucy found very hard to describe. Sweet, yes, but not at all sleepy or overpowering. A fresh, wild, lonely smell that seemed to get into your brain and make you feel like you could go up mountains at a run or wrestle with an elephant. She and Caspian said to one another, "I feel like I can't stand much more of this, but I don't want it to stop." They took soundings very often, but only several days later did the water become shallower. And after that, it went on getting shallower. There came a day when they had to row out of the current and feel their way forward at a snail's pace, rowing. And soon it was clear that the Dawn Treader could sail no further east. Indeed, it was only by very careful handling that they saved her from running aground. "Lower the boat," said Caspian, "and then call the men to the stern. I must speak to them." "What's he going to do?" said Eustace. "There's a queer look in his eye." "I think we probably all look the same," said Edmund. They joined Caspian back on the poop deck, and soon all the men were crowded together at the foot of the ladder to hear the king's speech. "Friends," said Caspian, "we have now fulfilled the quest on which you embarked. The 7 lords are all accounted for, and as Sir Reepicheep has sworn never to return, when you reach Ramadou's land, you will doubtless find the Lords Revilian and Dargaz and Mavraborn awake. To you, my Lord Drinian, I entrust this ship, and I bid you to sail to Narnia with all the speed you can, and above all, not to land on the island of Deathwater. And instruct my regent, the dwarf Trumpkin, to give all these my shipmates the rewards that I promised them. They have earned it well. And if I do not come back again, it is my will that the regent and Master Cornelius and Truffle Hunter the Badger and the Lord Drinian choose a king of Narnia with the consent. But sire, interrupted Drinian, are you abdicating? I am going with Reepicheep to see the world's end, said Caspian. A low murmur of dismay ran through the sailors. We will take the lifeboat, said Caspian. You will have no need of it in these gentle seas, and you can build a new one on Ramadou's island. And now, Caspian, said Edmund sternly, you can't do this. Most certainly, said Reepicheep. His Majesty cannot. No, indeed, said Drinian. Can't, said Caspian sharply, looking for a moment not unlike his uncle Miraz. Begging your master's pardon, said Rhine-Elf from the deck below, but if one of us did the same, it would be called deserting. You presume too much on your long service, Rhine-Elf, said Caspian. No, sire, he is perfectly right, said Drinian. By the mane of Aslan, said Captain, I thought you were all my subjects here, not my schoolmasters. I'm not your subject, said Edmund, and I say you cannot do this. Can't again. What do you mean? If it please your majesty, we mean shall not, said Reepicheep in a very low bow. You are the king of Narnia. You break faith with all your subjects, and especially with Trumpkin, if you do not return. You shall not please yourself with adventures as if you were a private person. And if your majesty will not hear reason, it will be the truest loyalty of every man on board to tie you up until you come to your senses. Quite right, said Edmund, like they did with Ulysses when he wanted to go near the sirens. Maybe you've read those books and know what he's talking about. Caspian's hand had gone to his sword hilt, but Lucy said, and you promised Ramadou's daughter to go back. Caspian paused. Oh, well, yes, there is that, he said. And he stood irresolute for a moment, and then he shouted out to the ship in general, all right, have your way. The quest is ended. We shall all return. Get the boat back up again. Sire, said Reepicheep, we do not all return. As I explained before. Silence, thundered Caspian. I've been taught, but I will not be baited. Will no one silence this mouse? Your Majesty promised, said Reepicheep, to be good lord to the talking beasts of Narnia. Talking beasts, yes, said Caspian. I said nothing about beasts that never stopped talking. And he flung down the ladder in a temper and went into his cabin and slammed the door. But when the others joined him a little later, they found him changed. He was white, and there were tears in his eyes. It's no good, he said. I might as well have behaved decently for all the good I did with my temper and my swagger. Aslan has spoken to me. No, I don't mean he was actually here. He wouldn't fit into this cabin, for one thing. But that golden lion's head on the wall came to life and spoke to me. It was terrible, his eyes. Not that he was at all rough with me, only a bit stern at first, but it was terrible all the same. And he said, oh, I can't bear it. The worst thing he could have said. He said, you're to go on, Reep and Edmund and Lucy and Eustace, and I'm to go back alone and at once. Oh, what is the good of anything? Caspian, dear, said Lucy, you knew we'd have to go back to our world sooner or later. Yes, said Caspian with a sob, but this is sooner. You'll feel better when you get back to Ramadou's island, said Lucy. He cheered up a little later on, but it was a grievous parting on both sides, and I will not dwell on it. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, well fed and watered, though they would need neither food nor drink, and with Reepicheep's coracle on board, The lifeboat pulled away from the Dawn Treader to row through the endless carpet of lilies. The Dawn Treader flew all her flags and hung out her shields to honor their departure. Tall and big and homelike she looked from their low position in the lilies all around them. And even before she was out of sight, they saw her turn and began rowing slowly toward the west. And though Lucy shed a few tears, she couldn't feel it as much as you might have expected. The light, the silence, the tingling smell of the silver sea, and in some odd way, the loneliness itself was too exciting. There was no need to row, for the current drifted them steadily to the east. Here they all are in the boat. And you can see little Reepicheep's coracle at the back there. None of them slept or ate, and all that night and all the next day they glided eastward. And when the third day dawned, with a brightness you and I could not even bear, even if we had dark glasses on, they saw a wonder ahead. It was as if a tall wall stood between them and the sky, a greenish-gray, trembling, shimmering wall. Then up came the sun, and at its first rising, they saw it through the wall, and it turned into a wonderful rainbow of colors. Then they knew that the wall was really a long, tall wave, a wave endlessly fixed in place, as one might often see at the edge of a waterfall. But it was about 30 feet high, and the current was gliding them swiftly toward it. You might have supposed that they would have thought of their danger. They didn't. I don't think anyone could have in their position, for now they saw something, not only behind the wave, but behind the sun. They couldn't have seen the sun if their eyes had not been strengthened by the water of the last sea, but now they could look at the rising sun and see clearly things beyond it. And what they saw eastward, beyond the sun, was a range of mountains. It was so high that either they never saw the top of it or they forgot it. None of them remember seeing any sky in that direction at all. And the mountains really must have been outside the world. For any mountain, even a quarter or a 20th of that height, ought to have had ice and snow on top of them. But these were warm and green and full of forests and waterfalls, however high you looked. And suddenly there came a breeze from the east, tossing the top of the wave into foamy shapes and ruffling the smooth water all around them. It lasted only a second or two, but what it brought them in that second, none of the three children will ever forget. It brought both a smell and a sound, a musical sound. Edmund and Eustace would never talk about it afterwards. Lucy could only say, "It would break your heart." "Why?" I asked. "Was it so sad?" "Sad? No," said Lucy. No one in that boat doubted that they were seeing beyond the end of the world into Aslan's country. And at that moment, without a crunch, the boat ran aground. The water was too shallow now. "This is," said Reepicheep, "is where I go on alone." Now this is where I have got to wake up my iPad again. Come on now. Wake up for me. Okay. And this is the picture I wanted to show you. Well, I'm trying to get the picture to show clearly here. All right, there we go. This is the picture on my iPad I wanted to show you. It's what one artist thought that this scene probably looked like. There's the little round coracle. There are all the lilies. And there's little Reepicheep in his coracle, paddling his way through up to that great big huge wave that's ahead of him. We can't see the wave in this picture, but you get the idea. Sorry about that little techno difficulty there. All right. They helped him to lower his little coracle, and then he took off his sword. "I shall need it no more." And he flung it far away across the lilied sea. And where it fell, it stood up straight with its hilt above the surface. Then he bade them goodbye, trying to be sad for their sakes, but he was quivering with happiness. Lucy, for the first and last time, did what she had always wanted to do, taking him in her arms and petting him. Then hastily he got into his coracle and took his paddle, current caught it, and away he went, very black among the lilies. But no lilies grew on the wave. It was a smooth green slope. The coracle went more and more quickly, and beautifully it rushed up the wave's side, and for one split second they saw its shape and Reepicheep's shape at the very top. Then it vanished, and since that moment no one can have truly claimed to see Reepicheep the mouse. But it is my belief that he came safely to Aslan's country and is alive there to this very day. As the sun rose, the sight of those mountains outside the world faded away. The wave remained, but there was only blue sky behind it. The children got out of the boat and waded, not toward the wave, but southward, with the wall of water on their left. They could not have told you why they did this. It was their fate. And though they had felt and been very grown up on the Dawn Treader, they now felt just the opposite, and they held hands as they waded through the lilies. They never felt tired. The water was warm, and all the time it got shallower. And at last they were on dry sand, and then on grass, a huge plain of very fine, short grass, almost level with the silver sea, and spreading in every direction without so much as a molehill. And of course, as it always does in a perfectly flat place without trees, it looked as if the sky came down to meet the grass in front of them. But as they went on, they got the strangest impression that the sky really did come down and join the earth in a blue wall, very bright, but real and solid, more like glass than anything else. And soon they were quite sure of it, and it was very close now. But between them and the foot of the sky, there was something so white on the green grass that even with their eagle's eyes, they could hardly look at it. And when they came on, they saw that it was a lamb. "Come and have breakfast," said the lamb in its sweet voice. Then they noticed for the first time that there was a fire lit on the grass and fish roasting on it. They sat down and ate the fish, hungry now for the first time in many days. And it was the most delicious food they ever tasted. "Please, lamb," said Lucy, "is this the way to Aslan's country?" "Not for you," said the lamb. "For you, the door of Aslan's country is from your own world." "What?" said Edmund. "Is there a way into Aslan's country from our world too?" "There is a way into my country from all the worlds," said the lamb. But as he spoke, his snowy white flushed into tawny gold, and his size changed, and it was Aslan himself. And the light was scattering from his mane. "Oh, Aslan, will you tell us how to get into your country from our world?" "I shall be telling you all the time," said Aslan. "But I will not tell you how long or short the way will be, only that it lies across a river. But do not fear that, for I am the great bridge builder. And now, come, I will open the door in the sky and send you to your own land." "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "before we go, will you tell us, please, when we can come back to Narnia again? And please, please do make it soon." "Dearest," said Aslan very gently, "you and your brother will never come back to Narnia." "Oh, Aslan," said Edmund and Lucy both together in despairing voices. "You are too old, children," said Aslan, "and you must begin to come close to your own world now." "But it isn't Narnia, you know," said Lucy. "It's you. We shan't meet you there. And how can we live never meeting you?" "But you shall meet me, dear one," said Aslan. Are you there too, sir?" said Edmund. "I am," said Aslan, "but there I have another name." "You must begin to know me by that name. This was the very reason why you were brought to Narnia, that by knowing me here for a little while, you may get to know me better there." "And is Eustace never to come back either?" said Lucy. "Child," said Aslan, "do you really need to know that? Come, I am opening the door in the sky." And then, all in one moment, there was a rending of the blue wall like a curtain being torn, and a terrible white light from beyond the sky, and the feel of Aslan's mane, and a lion's kiss on their foreheads, and then the back bedroom in Aunt Alberta's home in Cambridge. Only one or two other things need to be told. One is that Caspian and all his men came safely back to Ranbadu's island, and the three lords woke from their sleep, and Caspian married Ranbadu's daughter, And they all reached Narnia in the end, and she became a great queen and the mother and grandmother of great kings. The other is that back in our own world, everyone soon started saying how Eustace had improved and how you'd never know it was the same boy. Everyone except Aunt Alberta, who said that he had become very commonplace and tiresome, and it must be the influence of those Pevensie children. And that is the end of The Voyage of the Long Treader. Wow. So, boys and girls, you've read a lot about Aslan in this book. And what has it told you? The very last thing that he told us was that we can know about Aslan in our world, but here he's known by a different name. What do you think that name is? I know you know what it is. It's Jesus. He's Aslan, and he's someone that we can learn about in our world. We won't learn about him by reading the Chronicles of Narnia. We learn about him looking in this book. And I'll bet you've got one of these of your very own at home, or there's one somewhere lying around your house somewhere. Everybody's got a Bible. In the Bible, especially in the New Testament, especially in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first 4 books of the New Testament, is the story of Jesus. And it's a wonderful story. Lucy was right when she said it was the most beautiful story she'd ever heard. And I hope that you will come to know the Lord Jesus and love him and want to be with him and want to do what he wants you to do, just like the Pevensie children learned to do with Aslan in Narnia. That's my prayer for you. Now, I'm going to say goodbye now, and the next time we're together, we're going to start reading book number 6, which is called The Silver Chair. Hope we'll see you then. Bye for now.